Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, training camp is just around the corner. We have an official schedule now. Unlike last week, we have the official schedule. Really excited to be up here for my first training camp. I'm really looking forward to it. And I know everybody is looking forward to it because there's a lot of questions that are still lingering out there that I think people want answers for before the season starts. So today we're going to be going over 6 training camp storylines that we think are kind of the most pressing ones. There's certainly questions you and I want answered. We're going to talk kind of how we think things might go, RJ. Got a couple little, news items to get to first as well. But of course, we got to start thanking our sponsor, Queen Anne Beer Hall. Now, RJ, football season is officially underway. We're almost done with week 1. Just got Monday night left tonight. Seahawks, it was ugly, but they got a win. They're up. They're 1-0. That's a good way to start the season. Going next week, RJ, to New England, to Foxborough, to play the Patriots. It's going to be a 10 a.m. Pacific time start. What better way to go and enjoy that game than checking out the Moss Bay Hall location's brunch menu? It's been a while since I mentioned the brunch menu over at Moss Bay Hall. Feels like a 10 a.m. Seahawks game. Kind of might be the reason to go check it out, right?
Yeah, it's perfect for those early football games. Man, brunch and morning football. Does it get any better than that on a Sunday? I mean, the opponent's going to be tough. New England's no joke. They showed that week 1, kicked me out of my survivor pool. But yeah, they're going to be a tough opponent, but I think the Seahawks can get it done.
They should. They're not a week 1 Bengals team. As a Bengals fan, I know week 1 we never win. It was terrible. But I think the Seahawks will have a much better chance against the Patriots. So go check out Queen Anne Beer Hall, the Moss Bay Hall location. Check out their brunch menu and maybe get that going for the Seahawks next week when they have their first road game of the season. I think that would be a lot of fun. Now, RJ, I teased it earlier, but we do in fact have a training camp schedule, and I think we should probably let everybody know what that is.
That's right. So Kraken training camp is right around the corner. I was so excited when this dropped. Of course, the day after our last podcast, because we know how this works. But Kraken training camp officially starts Thursday, September 19th. So that is 10 days from today. But don't worry, Dylan, we don't have to wait that long to see Kraken players on the ice because rookie camp starts this week on the 12th, on Thursday. So it's the 12th, the 13th, and the 17th is rookie camp. Of course, in between there, they're going to go to LA and do the little rookie face-off against some other NHL teams' rookies. They're going to come back here on the 17th. And then training camp itself will open up on the 19th. That's going to run all the way through October 7th. I won't go through the entire schedule, but it's 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd. It's most of the days in between there. That whole schedule we posted on our Instagram. You can see a little graphic. The Kraken have that posted on their website, so you can go check that out. And of course, pretty much all of it, I think just about all of it is going to be open to the public so people can go and watch. Would highly recommend. I know there are certain specific days that are set aside. I know like the 20th is a season ticket member viewing and things like that. But for most of the days, you should be able to just go and watch training camp, which again, would highly recommend.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm super pumped to be up here for the first time seeing one. It's just, this is where everything starts, right? And we've all been jonesing for our Kraken fix, and this is like the perfect opportunity to get it in kind of day after day as training camp gets underway. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to our first training camp under a new coach. That's going to be really exciting to kind of see how things shake out. First look at players like Brandon Montour, Chandler Stevenson, how they come in and what they're going to look like, what role they might have on a team. More on that in a little bit, I think, as we get into the storylines we're looking forward to. So yeah, it's just going to be a lot of fun, and I hope to see a lot of people there.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And definitely, again, I cannot recommend this highly enough. Come to training camp. It's going to be so fun seeing all the players there. And also the mix of rookies and veterans too, because you don't really get to see that any other time of year. Either it's just the team, that's just made the roster once the year starts, or you see things like rookie camp and dev camp, but you don't ever get to see the two of them together.
Exactly. Now, RJ, people do show up to training camp, which we hope they do. They're going to look out on the ice, and they might notice a couple things are a little bit different from what they've seen before with the Seattle Kraken in relation to at least 2 players' jersey numbers.
That's right. So we got some news this week. Actually, I think we broke the news with some help. By the way, I want to shout out Lindsay in the community there,
Yes,
for giving us a little tip to help us dig a little bit further and be able to finally confirm the news. But a couple Kraken have changed their jersey numbers for next season. So we'll start with Ty Cartier, was number 52 previously with the Kraken. He's changing his jersey number to 12. So this makes sense because 12 was the number he wore in the AHL with the Firebirds and also in junior with the Sioux Greyhounds as well. So that's kind of been his number coming up. And when he joined the Kraken in the playoffs in 2023, he was kind of just thrown under the roster right in the playoffs. And usually what happens, how that works, is you're just kind of assigned a number. And I think that's probably what happened there with 52. And then eventually, once you stick around and make it, then at a certain point, you're usually able to choose the number that you want. And it's kind of a sign, actually, that you've really made it, that you become a regular NHLer. So I'm happy for him with this number change.
Definitely.
And then the second one, Riker Evans. So this is actually a number that we've seen him in before. He is going from 39 back to 41. So those of you may remember that he was originally number 41 with the Kraken, but he gave it up last season for the veteran Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, a sign of respect there, giving the veteran the number that he wanted. But with Bellemare not coming back to the Kraken this year, Evans is going to take number 41 again, which I think is his preferred number.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it is. I'm really excited for both those guys. It's again a signal that they're going to be sticking around. They're going to be a major part of this team and of this group. I think that's something that a lot of people want to see, even if it hurts maybe if you've already got the jersey with the old numbers. But hey, that just shows that you are an OG fan of theirs and you were around at the beginning. It's going to be fun still wearing those jerseys, especially like 10 years from now. Be really, really cool. So I'm excited for those two guys to be around, getting their numbers in, and they can go and, make those numbers theirs and cement themselves in Kraken history, RJ.
Exactly. And if you have like you said, if you have a Cartier number 52 jersey, or even maybe Otter Riker Evans 39 jersey, because it would have to be in this little stretch of time. I do think that's really cool. I love seeing those. I love seeing around Climate Pledge, the McCann 16 jerseys.
Yeah.
Right. And I like that, I get it if you want to get the number changed to the current number, but I think it does show like you were a fan of them kind of early at a certain time.
Yeah, I think it's something special to have those. So I'm excited for them, excited for all this stuff to just get underway, RJ. So let's just go ahead and dive right in to the training camp storylines that we have here. And I want to start with this one because I feel like kind of the biggest one. And it's something that we've made a lot of noise about talking about, and people have been talking about on social media and just amongst themselves and everything. And that is, RJ, if the Kraken are going to have a full roster this season, right now, they're a little over $1.5 million over the cap, and somebody's going to have to go. And I would assume the Kraken want to have a full roster this season. They'd probably like to have some healthy scratch players around for a lot of reasons. In case somebody gets banged up, you have some flexibility with different lineups going on, stuff like that. If the Kraken are going to do that, though, they're over the cap. And so one of the big storylines of training camp and the preseason is kind of who's going to be gone.
Right. And it's something that's kind of hanging over everyone's heads heading into training camp. And this is the first time the Kraken have really been in this situation. Usually they had plenty of cap room to deal with. There hasn't been a clear sense that somebody has to go, but that really is the case here. So I do want to clear something up too, because this was talked about on the Discord yesterday. And so I wanted to, for everybody, explain, because if you do check Puckpedia, if you do go look at the Kraken's roster, they do appear to be under the cap. And technically they are. They have a little over $4,000 in cap space, which is not a lot, but that's with a 21-man roster. So that just gives you one extra player beyond the guys who are dressed. And that is way less flexibility than you ever want to go into a season with, because if somebody gets hurt and needs to go on IR, you can't afford a call up, and all of a sudden you just don't have enough players. Also, you can't accrue a ton of cap space. Just having the 4,000 in cap space, it's not a whole lot. So really, it's not a realistic situation that they go very far into the season with this as their setup, right? It's just probably not going to happen. So somebody does need to move. And of course that begs the question, well, who is it going to be? We've talked about this a little bit because once Matty Beniers signed his extension, that's when the writing was on the wall. Yeah. And so we opined about that a little bit. I think we both agreed that Brandon Tanev probably makes the most sense. But is there anybody else that even could be considered to clear up some cap space?
I mean, the other like quote unquote obvious one, and we can also kind of get into a little bit more of, or a second side of the discussion around this player in a little bit. But it's Yanni Gourde, just because he's in the last year of his contract. I think with both Brandon Tanev and Yanni Gourde, the fact that they are going to be UFAs at the end of this year kind of makes them feel like they could then, go somewhere else, help out maybe a contender or a team that's a little bit more of a contender than the Kraken right now. Kraken could still get an asset back for them because they are a piece that could go help a contender. So the Kraken should be able to get something nice back for them. And they have contracts that are large enough that it solves this problem that the Kraken have, which is having to clear up a certain number in cap space. So I still think Yanni Gourde, if it's not going to be Brandon Tanev, Yanni Gourde seems the next most likely player. And then we can also kind of get into the questions around what his role, if he was to be around, would be in a little bit as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are the two names that you're probably looking at, either Brandon Tanev or Yanni Gourde, just because the Kraken have a logjam of top 9 forwards. There's just so many forwards kind of in that tier that it's the place that you can replace the most. I would be shocked to see a defenseman like Will Borgen moved or something, because then there's a huge hole on the blue line if you were to do that. So I think you are going to look at a forward, and Brandon Tanev just makes so much sense to me. I mean, look, he's a fourth liner. He's
Right.
a very good fourth liner, but he's an expensive fourth liner. And if you need to move some money out, it just makes all the sense in the world to do that. I think he still has some positive value just because there are teams with cap space that can take on that contract. He can be, look, he works really hard, right? He can be an example of good work habits and all that stuff for your players. And then if you're not competitive, if you're not looking to go to the playoffs, you can retain half of that salary and move him at the deadline for probably a pretty decent asset. So anything that you would give up, you'd probably get more than that back at the deadline. So that just makes sense to me from a perspective of moving him. Also from the Kraken, I think I've said this in the past. I think this could be addition by subtraction. I think you get a player who's younger, maybe a little hungrier, maybe someone with a little bit more of a finishing touch. And I think just by moving him, you could actually improve the roster.
Right. And we know the place where he does the most for the Kraken is on the penalty kill, and they have a lot of guys capable of kind of filling the hole that he'll leave on the penalty kill. I think, we still need to see Matty Beniers on the penalty kill. I feel like that's one of the biggest things back when I was scouting him back at the 2021 draft that I talked about with Matty Beniers was his ability to kill penalties, and we've never really seen him as a full-time PKer on this team, and I think he's deserving of that spot. You have some other guys on this roster that I think could get the job done. So Brandon Tanev makes a lot of sense to me. Do you think that the Kraken would maybe retain a little bit of money on that deal? Because it is, you are talking about a guy who is a fourth liner, not going to be playing top 6 on any team around RJ, and his cap hit is 3.5. Do you think the Kraken would retain like $1 million? It still gets them clear of the cap. It might help make him a little bit more attractive to a different team. This is certainly something I was thinking if they were to move Yanni Gourde, because Yanni Gourde would be clearing a much larger cap hit. The Kraken could more easily retain some on a Yanni Gourde kind of situation. Or do you think the Kraken, if they're going to move somebody out, they're going to want to have, say, $1 million in cap flexibility just in case they need it, and they're not going to want to retain anything?
I think they should certainly look into retaining something, and it might open up the trade market. If it's the difference between maybe a 6th round pick and a 4th or a 5th, maybe it's not worth it, and you'd just rather clear that money off of your books. But if it can ensure that you get a notably better asset, then sure, look into it, because it should clear up enough cap space anyway if they just retain $1 million or so, like you said. And every team has 3 retention slots too. So the Kraken have none of those filled at the moment. They're not going to use all 3 this year, I can't imagine, or they wouldn't want a 4th.
Right.
So I think it's fine. They're not going to be worried about that. So yeah, I think they should certainly look into it. And it is more real dollars out of ownership's pockets, but we know, thankfully, they don't care about that. They're happy to spend whatever to make sure the team can be as competitive as possible. So certainly if it's Yanni Gourde, I agree. You probably want to retain something, because then you're looking to get a bigger return, something that's going to be worth it. Because with Tanev, like I said, I think it's addition by subtraction. I can't say that about Yanni Gourde. I think you actually are making the roster noticeably worse if you trade him away. So you're going to need to get something back that's going to make that worth it.
Yeah, I agree. So that's the situation there. Do you have anything else you want to talk about when it comes to who we might see have to move from the Kraken?
Maybe not with who, but maybe when. Just because there is no technical time pressure, right, to get this done by season start. You can go into the season under the cap with a 21-man roster. It's not ideal, but I do wonder when we see a trade. I would have thought maybe even before camp, just so it's not a distraction hanging over everyone's head. But certainly if they wait, which they can afford to wait, that's a dynamic that's going to be at play, especially given that it's really just two guys that it makes sense for. And so as you watch a Brandon Tanev or a Yanni Gourde in training camp, going through drills, everything, them probably knowing one of us might be traded out of here. And especially if we don't look the best, we might be traded out of here.
It is going to be really interesting, and it's going to be so different than everything else that we're going to be watching for at training camp. Is going to be kind of looking at those two guys and asking that question and knowing that they're probably thinking the same thing, knowing that Ron Francis has to be thinking that way. It's going to be very, very interesting to kind of go through that process, and also kind of keeping an eye around the league, right? Does somebody disappoint in a training camp somewhere else that, was in line to have a similar role of what a Brandon Tanev could bring? And then are we going to be looking at that and going, hey, maybe there's a fit here. Maybe the Kraken should get a move on. If the Kraken are
an injury,
right,
where all of a sudden you need somebody to fill that role,
right? If the Kraken were to enter the season with a 21-man roster, though, RJ, that gives them one healthy scratch player to have around. Do you have an idea of what that might be? Do you think that would be a forward or a defenseman? Because that's really the question I feel like that you're then asking. Is we get to have one extra body. Do we want it on the blue line or do we want it up front? I mean, it would probably be a forward, just someone who's versatile and can fill one of three spots instead of just one on the back end, maybe.
Probably, although I actually think,
but it's more damaging if you lose a defenseman.
I would think. Yeah, I would think it'd be a defenseman just because you look at who the forwards are. You have like a Ryan Winterton, a Logan Morrison that can go down to Coachella Valley and not require waivers, I believe. So you have those guys versus, and some of the other veterans you're probably not too worried about losing on waivers versus your seventh defenseman, Josh Mahura. That's the one where I'd be worried about potentially losing him on waivers. And then if you do, I mean, I guess you do have Cale Fleury, but it's not the ideal situation there to kind of be one guy deep there. It just makes more sense to me, I guess, to keep Mahura as the seventh D.
That's what
if it gets to that point, which I don't think it will, but if it does,
right. That's what I was thinking. But you brought it up that is part of this, is that they don't have that time pressure, so to speak. It would just be that at some point you're going to want extra guys around just in case. Yeah. So had to ask the question. All right, on to maybe topics that aren't going to stress as many fans out, because I know that last conversation is maybe not the conversation that a lot of people wanted to hear, particularly starting off this podcast that's otherwise very optimistic and looking ahead to training camp and all the fun stuff. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the more like on ice training camp questions here, RJ. And the first thing I'm really looking forward to is to see if kind of my earlier off-season, prediction is kind of correct. And is this team going to be focusing on skating, getting faster, attacking in transition, using the full length of the ice, utilizing Jess Campbell, who was added to the staff, who is, of course, one of the best coaches in the world when it comes to teaching skating. And I'm really, really interested to see if, like I said earlier this offseason, the addition, drafting of a Berkeley Catton, adding Jess Campbell to the roster as an assistant coach, going out there and grabbing the two players in free agency that you do, and a Brandon Montour who can help move the puck up the ice and skate the puck up the ice as a defenseman, a Chandler Stevenson who has some, decent straight line skating, and just bringing in Dan Bylsma, who had a much more transitional style of attack with the Firebirds than anything we saw from Dave Hackstall with the Kraken last year. I'm really interested to see how all of these pieces kind of come together in training camp, and to see if we start seeing some of this come together, some of this skating and emphasis on attacking that way, play out at all.
Right. I remember after the Jess Campbell and Bob Wood's intro press conference, you said to me, I can see the vision. No, I know I can see where they're going with this actually. Like it makes sense to me now. Because I remember prior to that, we both thought that she would be best as the Firebirds head coach, and it didn't make a ton of sense for her to come onto the Kraken staff. But you said you saw the vision, and a lot of that was based around speed and being quick in transition, and the players they brought in, it just all seemed to mesh that way. And you're right, we are going to get the chance to see if that's the vision that they actually are going with, right? Because that's still a guess on our part that's what they're going with. All the clues would seem to be there, but we get to see the reality of it, and that's going to be really interesting. I'm going to be leaning on you pretty heavily for that because I know it's kind of the vision that you're seeing, and you're better with that, with looking at that sort of stuff, and to see how it all comes together. And I'm sure there will be probably some growing pains with that too, if you switch your whole team philosophy. And I guess that gets into the part that I'm most interested to see. We know Chandler Stevenson can play with speed. We know Brandon Montour can play with speed. We know that those guys were brought in to make the system that way, but I want to see how the existing players adapt to it. And I want to see who sinks and who swims in that new style of play that they might be going with. I'm talking about a lot of the other forwards too, like a Jaden Schwartz or an Oliver Bjorkstrand, Andre Burakovsky. Who is the best fit? Jared McCann for I think McCann will be fine no matter what. Yeah. But for a system like that, right? Who fits it well and who doesn't. And I think that's something we're going to be looking out for as training camp goes along.
Right. I think it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch, especially because training camp is really interesting from a kind of coaching perspective of how you're going to run it, because you have a lot of time in the sense that you're going to have a couple weeks before the season starts that you can use to address whatever it is you want to address, particularly in a situation like this where you have a new head coach, largely new coaching staff around that new head coach. Got a couple key additions coming in and joining the team, whether it's the two free agents we talked about, Shane Wright coming in for, presumably his first full season. But at the same time, RJ, you don't have a ton of time because you have a couple weeks, but also you have to do a lot in that couple weeks. And so I'm really interested to see if they are if they're going to be aggressive and try to make maybe a wholesale change towards a transitional attacking scheme. Are they going to try to make that full change in this first offseason and the first season under the new head coach? Or do they take more of an approach of we're going to slowly start transitioning over to that? We're going to slowly start building the roster towards this. We're going to start playing this way more and more as the season goes on. Because you have to do all the normal training camp stuff where you're just getting everybody in the building, getting them used to playing again, getting them used to the grind of it all, having to do all of that stuff from the get-go to bring in a whole new system and all of that other stuff and all the emphasis on skating and all of the practices and drills that you would then assume Coach Jess Campbell would have them running to get them ready for this. I just don't know that you can commit as much time as you would need to in a full training camp to make that overnight change the way that, maybe you'd want it to be. I just don't know that you have the time to do it. So I'm going to be really interested to see how they manage the time of that and how many drills we see the different assistant coaches maybe running, most particularly for this, which ones, Coach Jess Campbell will be running.
And that's the challenge, right? And I think back to the Kraken's inaugural season, all the way back then when Dave Haxtell was coming in and trying to implement his systems. And it was a little different because you had a whole group of guys who had never really played together before.
Yeah.
But we saw a very slow start from a systems perspective, right? Because, and we heard this from some of the players, where it's so difficult in just the limited time that you have in a training camp to get all of a brand new system down and learned and everything with all of the conditioning, the normal stuff you have to do in a training camp. And so really what it was is the Kraken during that season were kind of trying to add pieces on piecemeal during the season because they just didn't have time to get it all together in training camp. And a lot of that was why you saw some of the struggles that you saw in year one. This is a different situation because, like I said, the guys have played together before, but there are real time constraints. And that's something that's worth remembering and seeing where Dan Bylsma and co decide to spend their time and what things they decide to add, because there are real trade-offs they're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting. But that's just one of the things I'm looking forward to the most, is to see how much of this prediction I had, the vision that I saw, is going to start coming together for the Kraken, because I think it is one where the teams that are playing that way are having a lot of success right now. I feel like the Kraken don't have to look very far to see that. You just look up the road at Vancouver and you look at what Rick Tocchet did coming in and joining that team. Maybe had a little bit of a leg up on, say, what Dan Bylsma has to do here as the head coach of the Kraken, in the sense that Rick Tocchet was able to come in, late in a season, kind of put some building blocks and a foundation down, and then have a full off season to work on things. But you look at Vancouver and how they were able to kind of, really change over and have a very successful year last year with this attacking transitional style. We know Vegas and the success they've had for years now with it. I think it is something that the Kraken are going to move towards, just because I think all teams have to. And they have such a great asset to help them do that in Coach Jess Campbell. I really, really would love to see a lot of drills and stuff based around this, and her working with a lot of the guys on their skating. I think that would just, go a long way to making the Kraken a better team next year.
And you mentioned Tocchet having a little bit of the prior season in Vancouver as a way to kind of get things established. And Dan Bylsma doesn't have the benefit of that, but he actually, he has been in the organization and has worked with some of these players. So hopefully that kind of carries over. And that's another thing I'm interested to look at too. Not just the forwards that I mentioned, kind of the middle six guys, but especially the younger players who have played under Dan and Jess before, whether it be like a Ty Karche or a Shane Wright or Morrison, Winterton, because they'll be up at camp. Do they start to look really good and look better, maybe even than we expect, because they have the experience playing that way? I am going to keep an eye on that as well.
Definitely. All right. What else are you going to be keeping an eye out for, RJ? What other storylines are you looking for?
The next big storyline I have is the centers. And this is one where I've kind of lumped together a few storylines, because as I was making the notes for this, I just went individually by player. Like, okay, what's Chandler Stevenson's role going to be? That's a storyline. What's Yanni Gourde's role going to be? That's a storyline. We talked about it with the trades. And I ended up just listing every single center really that we're expecting, right? Whether it's Chandler Stevenson, Matty Beniers, Shane Wright, or Yanni Gourde, figuring out where they're all going to slot in, what each of their roles are going to be, is going to be one of the most important things the Kraken have to do and figure out. And one of the biggest questions we have going into camp, because it's not going to look the way it did last year. Alex Wenberg is gone. Chandler Stevenson, huge contract, big acquisition, right? Yeah. And he's going to play an important role, but what is that going to look like? And what's it going to do to the other centers?
Yeah, should we just take it one by one? Because really, I think that's the best way to do this. All right. Do you want to start? You want to start bottom up or top down? How do you want to do this?
Let's start bottom up, because I think that's really intriguing. And because we've already talked about Yanni Gourde a bit as a potential player to be moved, on paper, he's the 4C for this team. And I just feel like that can't stand all season, right?
It does. It doesn't seem like it can. I think it's something that you can start the season with, and then you kind of gauge how the season goes for you, right? If you're not trending towards potentially being a playoff team, we'll call it makes it obvious that, hey, he can do more. He can help out an organization. He is in the last year of his contract. You can start trending towards looking at making a move and moving him out. I mean, it's just such a tough one, because unless you're going to try to have equal distribution of ice time to take advantage of the fact that you have the center depth that the Kraken have, and really the forward depth in general, I just don't see how having him as a fourth line center makes a lot lot And
yeah, I mean, look, and with the ice time, you've been there, you've done that. This is what Hackstall did. And
it's not great.
It's enough.
Yeah. It's not great. So I really am struggling to see how you're going to get the most out of Yanni Gourde and what he can do. Like I said, in the short term, it seems okay, but the idea of having an 82 game season in which Yanni Gourde's going to be playing 10, 12 minutes a night with special teams, maybe he gets up to 15 himself because of special teams, playing on both the power play and PK units. But realistically, 5-on-5 ice time of like 10 to 12 minutes a night, it just doesn't compute for me. I don't see how that works in any way. So I'm going to be interested to see, do they experiment in training camp with having him, say, on Shane Wright's wing, where he can maybe help out Shane, take some face-offs, gets a little bit more playing time on the third line, something like that. I don't know, because you do have a little bit of that flexibility with Yanni Gourde. Otherwise, you kind of run into the same issue that you have with Brandon Tanev almost, of you're keeping this guy around who has a large cap hit, who's, you can't really use that much 5-on-5, but you're keeping him around for what he can do on special teams. And it's just like, that's a luxury that maybe, a really, really good team has, but I don't know that a team that's wanting to fight to try to be a wild card team kind of has.
Right. It's inefficient. And that's where I think we'll see Yanni probably tried it. I'd have to say, I think it's more likely than not that they try him at wing at some point during the training camp and preseason, because he's just too good to be a 4C. I know he's not the player he once was, but he's too good to be a 4C, and he is wasted there. And I think he's probably not going to be happy with that, because I think he knows he's too good to be a 4C. Look, he's a professional. He's a team player. He would never complain about that.
Right.
But internally, he probably wouldn't be happy with a full season there. And I think there are some benefits potentially. And I think you brought this up late last season, maybe, where Yanni being on, say, Shane Wright's wing, that can help Shane Wright maybe be a little bit more aggressive, because we've seen in the past where, like when we had Jared McCann at center, or with wing right with Matty Beniers, where they kind of split some of the defensive responsibilities of the center position. I think you could see that a little bit. As responsible as Shane is, maybe it lets him get a little bit more aggressive, or it gives Shane Wright, say, like just a bulldog to go in the corner, right? Yanni Gourde, if he can really play that winger style of game, we know he can do that and go retrieve pucks and not have to worry about things defensively. It makes too much sense to me, I think, to put him at wing and see what he can do there, because I think he's a lot more useful to you as a wing in the top 9, getting those top 9 minutes rather than anywhere on the fourth line.
Well, and it ensures that both, or neither really, Yanni Gourde or Shane Wright gets fourth line minutes, because we are acting as though Yanni Gourde is the 4C, but like, it is possible that coaching staff could decide to have Shane Wright kind of be the 4C. I don't think it makes a lot of sense, because you want him to have more minutes so that he can develop at the NHL level. But like, that is an option that's also on the table here, is that Yanni Gourde would just kind of continue to be the 3C. Shane Wright's then down on the fourth line. If you have them both playing together, you can ensure that both of them are getting third line minutes, which is better for both of them, because you're maximizing what you have in Yanni Gourde more, because he's just getting more playing time. And then Shane Wright is also getting the minutes that he needs to develop at that next level. So I think for a lot of reasons, it makes a lot of sense to have Yanni Gourde place him on the wing, because we know he's capable of. And yes, I love that the idea of having Yanni Gourde out there to be able to forecheck with a young player like Shane Wright, or heck, even Matty Beniers. Throw him on a line with Matty Beniers or something, depending on how the top 6, how the top 6 shakes out. If you want to move in that direction, if Shane Wright starts looking really, really good offensively, right, you maybe want to put him more in just pure offensive roles. You can have Matty Beniers, obviously great defensive player, something like that. Having Yanni gives you a lot of flexibility, but keeping Yanni at center doesn't. And I feel like, just to make the best use of him, we kind of got to see him make that move at some point. So definitely intriguing to see that in training camp. Let's go with Shane Wright. I just kind of talked about it. We're presuming he will be the third line center. It is possible, though, like I just said, RJ, that he would start on the fourth line. I don't know. You want to get him going. You want to get his confidence going. I feel like you probably should give him more playing time, but do you think they just try to make up for that by putting him, say, on like first unit power plays and stuff like that?
I think he'll certainly get some power play time, regardless of where he is at 5-on-5. I agree with you. I think it's probably better that he's in the top 9, and look, he's ready for it. He hit the ground running during the call up at the end of last season. I know the grind of a full NHL season is a totally different animal, but I think you have to start him off in a place that's going to just give him more opportunities, right? If he's playing on the fourth line, that's just not a lot of reps to kind of get your game going. And I think that's what Shane Wright needs, and needed more than almost anybody else, just given the time that he's lost over the last 3 years, was just productive reps. And he's not going to get that playing fourth line minutes. Maybe he starts off there. We were thinking maybe he started off there on his call up last year, right?
Right.
But he didn't. He was playing in the top 9, maybe top 6. I'm trying to remember where he was, because he was with Schwartz and Everly. So
yeah,
he was playing pretty solid minutes to start. So I feel like it would almost be a step backwards for him to start on the fourth line. And this is a guy that doesn't need a step backwards.
No, he doesn't. I think the call up last year was fantastic for him at building that confidence. He was able to get in the lineup. He was scoring. He was being able to play the way he had been playing with the Firebirds and having success, and it just immediately translated to the NHL level, and he was able to have success with that. You know that that's got to go a long way for the confidence in a young player, that you can play your game and it's going to continue to translate. You're going to continue to have that same level of success at a higher level, playing against better competition. I think that that's really important. I think the other thing is, like, one of the reasons he had success last year was because, well, he'd go to the net, right? He was going to the slot. He was going to high percentage areas of the offensive zone in a way that nobody else on this roster did. And barring everybody buying into a completely new system right away from the beginning, which we talked about earlier, it's going to be hard to implement a whole new system right away and have everybody feel comfortable and confident in it. But if it's going to look like the system that Coach Bylsma was running in Coachella Valley, Shane Wright knows that system. He's going to be confident from day one in that system. We know he's confident going net front. We know he loves to play in the slot. He has, going back to his time in Major Junior. So I feel like Shane Wright also is going to need more playing time, just because it's entirely possible he's going to be like the most ready to go of any of these guys that we're talking about for the Seattle Kraken. And because he's one of the few guys that goes to the areas of the ice that they need players to go to, where he's going to actually score goals and he's actually going to produce for you. And so for all those reasons, I think he's going to get his fair share of playing time. Really, long term, the only questions I have for him, RJ, are all the standard questions you'd have for any player entering their first full season, which is, how's he going to handle the rookie wall when it comes, and when does it hit him, right? When does he run into it? Because those are the questions that everybody in their first full season kind of has. There's going to come a time where we're going to see his production probably dip a little, where he's going to look maybe a little slow, a little tired. Everybody goes through this. How long does it take for him to get there? And also, how bad are the effects on him? Because he has been playing, against professionals, against grown men in the AHL, with a long season and the grind of that. He went through that last year. I'm cautiously optimistic that it's not going to be that bad for him.
Right. And he doesn't seem like the type to really get in a funk over something like that either. He's had his ups and downs as a hockey player, and he kind of has shown in the past that he knows how to get through them. So I'm with you. I'm cautiously optimistic, because it is worth saying that rookie wall, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so putting him also in a position where when he hits that, he's in a place where, or surrounded by players that he can keep his confidence high enough, or that, like with Matty Beniers, when he had a bit of his rookie wall, right, where when he wasn't producing, he was still doing valuable things and helping the team. And I think he was able to see that, and the coaching staff was certainly able to see that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of Matty Beniers, let's talk about Matty Beniers here, RJ. I mean, there's a lot of questions here. He got paid, he got the extension. I guess the biggest questions for me, is he going to come into camp bigger? That's the number one thing I'm going to be looking for. Does he play more inside? Because I think that that's going to be really important for his growth offensively, is whether or not he can kind of play on the interior, go to the slot, all that kind of stuff that he has not traditionally done. He's very much been a perimeter player. So can he do those things? And also, RJ, can he shoot more than one place on a net on a goaltender? That might help him out a little bit, given he is a player prone to scoring droughts. I think it's fair to say he's had 2 full seasons in the NHL. It's been a struggle in each of those 2 seasons. Does he vary up the shots a little bit more?
I've been on him about varying up the shot selection a little bit. And I think that's something you could certainly work on over the offseason. Really, I think this was a crucial offseason for Matty Beniers. I think he's a very good player, a talented player, and a driven player who's in the past picked areas of his game to work on, right? When he was going back to his final season at Michigan, he had the defensive game down, and he tried to focus more on the scoring and doing all of that. And you could see the dividends in his rookie season with the Kraken. Hit that kind of almost like a sophomore slump really wall, And now he has to figure out a way around it. And so that's what a full off season of training is for. And I think the number one thing you mentioned is probably the most important thing. Does he come into camp bigger and stronger and able to kind of handle that grind a little bit more? And that's something that I guess, we'll see probably in the opening days of camp when we end up talking to him, right? It is what kind of shape he's come to camp in. And that's going to be huge. And then, varying things like the shot selection and the offensive parts of his game. Those are all things you can work on over the offseason. I guess we'll kind of get to see what kind of training that he had been doing and what the effects of it are, because this season is, this is where we find out who Matty Beniers really is, right? He had the Calder Trophy season. He had the last season that he had where he wasn't really able to produce offensively. And I think at the very minimum, he's a very, very good defensive center and can be an excellent, third line shutdown center at his absolute floor. But how much higher than that can he climb? And the Kraken are going to be really reliant on him to be more than that floor this year if they want to make the playoffs.
Yes. And it's really interesting too, because outside of the bulking up and being able to play at that higher weight, a lot of it's just a mentality and a mindset thing. Right? Going to the inside, going to the slot, taking that punishment, going to the net when it makes sense to. That's a mindset that he kind of needs to learn or add to his game or start to have in the offensive zone. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, through training camp, if the coaching staff works with him on that, if he's working on his own on it, are other players helping him do that, right? A Yanni Gourde. So, because I think that's really what's going to help him kind of take that next step offensively, is if he can go to the slot and get some good quality chances for himself. If he can take the puck inside a little bit so that he can set up his teammates a little bit better than just trying to do it from the perimeter all the time. Because if he takes the puck, he starts skating into the slot, he's going to draw in more defenders, he's going to open up his teammates a little bit more, he'll be able to make, passes and plays to his guys in a lot easier fashion than what he's used to, where he's kind of off on the perimeter and he's trying to thread the needle all the time. You don't always have to do that. If you take it inside a little bit, you're willing to take a little bit of contact, you'll open up somebody else for a really high quality chance, and you're going to get that assist, right? You're going to get that point production. Your team is going to score. Does he start to have that mentality? Does the coaching staff need to work with him to develop that mentality over training camp and over the earlier parts of the season? Has he already been thinking that way? Can he add that to his game? Those are all like kind of those questions that it's going to be really fascinating to kind of watch and see. I feel like with him specifically, that's the most that's just like, we're just going to have to wait and see. Like, it's really hard to speculate. Whereas with the other centers and all the kind of stuff that maybe they can have, we can have ideas of how it'll work. This one though, it's put up or shut up.
Right. And I think part of it also comes down to what is he being asked to do? That's what I'm interested to see as well, because you look at his role last season and he was kind of the clear 2C by ice time, right? Alex Wennberg played the most of any of the centers while he was still there, but Matty Beniers was leaned on pretty heavily from an ice time perspective. And you take out Alex Wennberg, you add Chandler Stevenson, and I think the consensus probably is Chandler Stevenson is a better option there than Alex Wennberg. Wennberg's realistically probably a third line center on a playoff team. Chandler Stevenson is a level above that. And how much weight are they trying to take off Matty's shoulders? And what is he going to be asked to do? And that I'm really curious to see. And I think we can get some indication of that through training camp and through the preseason games, and especially early in the year when we see what those ice time figures end up being, because I think a big reason Chandler Stevenson was brought in was to take some of that pressure off of Matty Beniers. And then what does that end up looking like?
Right. So let's talk Chandler Stevenson now. There's
like the contract is the elephant.
The contract's the elephant in the room, but I wasn't even going there.
It is okay. Well, it is what it is, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day, he's a player who's going to be on the ice playing and contributing to the Kraken, and that's what's going to be important in training camp. And as much as we weren't big fans of the contract, we could see the logic as to why he was brought in and the job that we think that he's coming in there to do, which is to take pressure off of these other young centers early.
Right. And so, what situations are the Kraken going to be putting him in? What is his role if they are implementing, they're going to be implementing a new system It's just a matter of, is it going to be as large a change as maybe I was, talking about earlier? But they're going to be implementing a new system. He is, of the guys that are going to be, one of the top 6 centers, obviously the most veteran of the group, because the other ones are like Maddie and Shane. So I'm interested to see how he takes on that pressure and that responsibility of being the guy for a team that has young centers and is going through a coaching change, a system change, really a philosophical change, a culture change, all of that stuff that's going on this offseason. You're the big money free agent. You're the veteran. You're the cups in the room. How does he handle that? And what does it look like, particularly at training camp? Is he helping the young guys, Maddie and Shane? Is he showing them things? Is he working with them one-on-one? Is he taking on more of a larger leadership role where he's, helping run drills, so to speak, right? He's pointing out things. He's communicating. He's being a vocal on-ice leader as drills are happening. Is he that kind of guy? We don't know him because he's coming in. This is going to be our first experience with him. I'm very curious to see, does he bring in some of those veteran leadership qualities with him that it sounds like he has based on, what everybody from Vegas has talked about.
Right. And that culture in Vegas, and talking about kind of the players and the coaches and everything, ignoring the front office culture in Vegas, but they've had a lot of success, right?
Right.
And that's the kind of thing there's a reason you bring in guys with cups in the room. You kind of want to port that over a little bit to Seattle, and he's going to be a big reason for that. And he's going to be asked to do a lot, because you had Wenberg in the role where he was playing against top competition. He was playing those top center minutes. And I feel like when Wenberg was on the ice, the goal more or less was to just make sure things were even, right?
Yeah.
Just don't get scored on. That was kind of the goal, and let the other lines do their thing. I think Stevenson, especially if he's playing with guys like Jared McCann or some of the more skilled guys, they're going to be expected to actually have a net positive, right? They're going to be expected to score some goals, to produce some offense while playing against top competition. And who is he going to gel with? Because that's the other thing. By looking at the line mates that he's able to build chemistry with, I think that might go, some of the way toward defining his role, whether it's, how offensive versus defensive it is.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I guess a lot of it for me when it comes to Chandler Stevenson is just waiting to see who he is, what he is for this team. It's just, I don't know. I don't have like too much from like a storyline idea. It's just like, I just want to get to know him, so to speak.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. And that's what we're going to be looking for from him.
Yeah. All right. Now, real quick, before I let you start the next topic, RJ, I want to circle back around to Shane, because there was something that I wanted to mention with Shane Wright that I didn't. And that is one thing that I'm curious to see with him in training camp is his leadership. I'm curious to see if Shane Wright, we've seen him in the past start to become more and more vocal of a leader, particularly during drills. I've seen it down there in Coachella Valley. He can be a vocal leader during warm-ups, stuff like that. I'm curious to see Shane Wright, because he's comfortable and familiar with the coach who's going to be running things and this coaching staff, because he's going to have some other Firebirds around him for training camp, right? We'll see. I assume Ryan Winterton, Logan Morrison's, other Firebirds are going to be there. Riker Evans is going to be there, all that kind of stuff. I'm curious to see if Shane takes on a little bit of a leadership role during training camp, just because he's going to feel like, hey, I've got a coach that I'm comfortable with who knows my style of leadership. I can show it. I've got guys I'm used to leading and talking to. And just because, he did come in and he performed well last year, I feel like there is a little bit of a hole for some of that on this roster. We've talked about it in the past. I'm very curious to see Shane Wright and how his leadership shows up in this kind of first training, like serious training camp where he's going to make the roster and everything. If he's going to come in and try to, establish himself in that way right away.
Yeah, and I'm hoping to see that. I'm hoping that the coaching situation helps him with that.
Uh-huh.
And we've seen this with other teams where you have kind of a generational shift at times, right? Where you kind of, and the Kraken, I think, are that way. You have that group of veteran players that were the original Kraken players, and they're now probably 30 or a little bit older. And then you have the younger guys who've come up a little bit through the Firebird system. And I think when you reach a critical mass of those guys, when you have one or two, they can kind of sink into the background. But when you have 4, 5 of them, then they can start to take on their own leadership role in the team. And you have both of those groups working together. And I'm hoping that's what we're starting to see starting with this season. I think it's always tough when you have, and nothing against like Dave Haxtell in that situation with him as the coach, but it's tough when you have that veteran group with the coach who's always been with the veteran group, and it's just a few guys coming up. But now that you have the coach being the one who has all the experience with the younger guys, I am hoping we see that leadership shift a little bit too.
Yeah. So that's I just wanted to add that in before we moved on to the next thing you want to talk about.
I actually think maybe we should, I know we have our order in our notes, but since we were talking leadership, I think we should actually go on to the biggest leadership question for the Kraken. And that is, who's going to be the captain? Because the Kraken still don't have a captain. They went with the 3A or 4As last season. It sounds like, I don't remember exactly what the team has said, but it sounds like they're going to name a captain probably by the end of training camp this season. I'd be very surprised if they didn't. And there are a few contenders, right? As far as who could be the captain, I think we probably agree that the leader, odds wise, at the moment, if we had to pick someone, was Jordan Eberle. But maybe we'll be surprised by another name. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the whole captaincy situation? I know we've talked about it. Feels like for years now.
Yeah.
the various, okay, when's the captain going to be? Who's going to be the captain? Has your opinion changed at all heading into this training camp? And what are you looking for, I guess, from anyone who would kind of take up that mantle?
Yeah, well, first off, I agree that they need to have a captain. Last year was very clear that they needed somebody to be the leader that everybody could turn to when things were bad, who was going to step up when things were bad and kind of take charge of the situation. That was something that they were lacking in the second half of last season when they just could not stop all the bad snowballs that were all, accumulating and rolling downhill and getting larger. They just didn't have that. So they need to have a captain. I think because you are kind of maybe just before that total, turn in leadership that we were talking about, that generational switch in leadership, I feel like having one of the more established veterans become the captain makes sense, but you also don't want to say go in a Yanni Gourde direction where he's going to be gone at the end of the year. You don't want like a one term captaincy, so to speak.
Been there, done that.
Yes. I don't think that benefits you. So I think having a guy who can be captain for 2 or 3 years makes a lot of sense. And then you make the switch over to one of the younger guys. I know I've talked in the past about Matty Beniers. I think Matty has other things he needs to focus on. I don't think he's in a spot where he should be captain and he's going to have to be focusing on the team as a whole. I think he still needs to figure out his game first. I think Shane Wright, realistically, he's got to figure out how to play in the NHL for a full season before he can be named captain. So I think you're looking at one of those more veteran presences, but you don't necessarily want to go, in my opinion, RJ, with a Chandler Stevenson or a Brandon Montour, guys who are veterans, guys who have won before, guys who would be very capable of leading the team, because I don't know that you want the captaincy locked up for 7 years before it would pass on to a Matty Beniers or a Shane Wright, when somewhere along the way they are going to become the leadership group of that team. And I know you can take the captaincy away and reassign it to a different player, but it's a little awkward to do that usually. I feel like all of this just kind of confirms that, like, yeah, Jordan Eberle makes the most sense because he's got 2 years, he'll be there, and then by the end of that, hopefully someone else one of the younger guys has emerged as that guy.
Yeah, I think on paper it makes the most sense. I personally think you shouldn't be afraid of, if, say, a Stevenson or a Montour really stepped up and you're like, yeah, that's probably the guy that we want. If the contract is the only thing holding you back, then I don't think you should let that. Yeah. Right. And that's, I guess, when we're talking about the captaincy, that's my one hope for this. And I don't think we'll ever know the true answer, at least not for maybe a decade out. And you start hearing stories on podcasts, but I don't think we'll know the true answer. I hope that this is actually, I don't know what to call it, maybe like an open competition for lack of a better phrase, right? I hope that that's the way that they're going into training camp and seeing who steps up and who they feel it should be after training camp has happened. My worry, and look, it's not the worst thing in the world, but my worry is that there's already kind of been a plan from maybe even before Haxtell was let go, that it was probably when they decided to re-sign Jordan Eberle, that there's been a plan that, okay, you sign him for 2 years. He's going to be the next captain. He can do the media thing really well. And he certainly can. He's probably the best choice from that perspective. And that is a lot of what a captain's duties are.
Yes.
But I worry that that's already been predetermined, and I just hope that it hasn't been, because I do want to see that training camp and who really emerges as the leader. And I feel like it's not best for the team if that was predetermined. Now, it very well still could be that you give it that training camp. Jordan Eberle seems like the guy, and you name him, and we'll never really know. But I just hope that it hasn't already been predetermined. And as I've said before, I do have my reservations with Eberle just a little bit, because he was there last year,
right,
as the culture kind of fell apart, as effort was really an issue. And that tells me that either he didn't step up and talk and say something, or that he did and the guys didn't listen. And either one of those, I think, is kind of bad.
Yeah.
So that's my slight concern about that. And certainly if he's been kind of already pre-named the captain, I feel like that doesn't really give it a whole lot of extra weight, or there's no reason to expect anything different, I guess, if that was the case. So that's my one concern. And I do want to talk about the NHL Twitter account posted a little graphic of like, who's going to be the next captain. And it was, I think it was Beniers, Eberle, McCann, and Montour. And those are some fine names to have, but people talked about it on the Discord. I think they did the meme where you have the 3 soldiers and the 1 clown, like one doesn't belong here, and referring to Brandon Montour because he just got here. I actually think it might not be the worst thing in the world to, if he steps up and if he's deserving of the captaincy, to go with maybe someone like a Brandon Montour. He seems like a great guy, and also bringing in some of that culture and having someone who maybe wasn't involved with everything that happened last year wouldn't be the worst thing.
No, I'm glad you brought that up with Jordan Eberle, because that was the next thing that I was going to talk about, which is any of the guys that were here last year, particularly the ones that did have A's on their sweater, feel suspect just because of how everything went down last year. And so I'm with you. I do think like that is something that would go in the favor of a Chandler Stevenson or certainly a Brandon Montour, is that they weren't around last year. We know that, in some ways, then there's hope, right? So to speak. and it's, again, we'll probably never know really what was going on in the locker room during those dark times last season. If people were talking what the relationship was between the players and the coaching staff and how it all kind of snowballed the way it did. But I just have to, it does give me pause if any of these guys were to be named captain that were involved in that last year. I think Brandon Montour makes a lot of sense for the reasons you stated, because like, I love that Florida Panthers culture. I love everything that Paul Maurice has done and kind of stands for from a philosophical standpoint, not just hockey, but life in general. And I think having somebody bring some of those lessons over to the Kraken would be a big deal, as they're kind of looking for what their cultural identity is going to be for the next significant future that they're going to have, right? I mean, they're right now around Matty Beniers, Shane Wright, eventually Berkeley Catton. You're going to want to establish an identity and a culture that can outlast a coaching staff, that can outlast a general manager. You want to try to find something that can become, a real true team and organizational identity. And I feel like then having somebody who is locked up for 7 years, who is coming from one of, if not the strongest organizational identities in Florida and under Paul Maurice, coming in and being given a leadership role and position on the team, it's really not a bad thing. And it could go a long way to helping the Kraken kind of achieve that for themselves, which I think is something that they do know is important and is something that they want to find.
Yeah, and on the awkward situation, potentially, if say 3 years down the line, right, you might want to give the C to a Matty Beniers or a Shane, right? I wouldn't be all that worried about it, because at that point, you're assuming that it has worked with Brandon Montour, right? Because if it hasn't, then it's not an awkward situation. You move the C on, it's easy. That it has worked. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to just keep the C where it is working, right? I don't think it necessarily needs to be your best player or your superstar player. And he is very good, right? It's not like you have him on a third pairing defenseman or anything. And I don't know that Shane Wright or Matty Beniers, as good as they are, would rise to that level of the superstar where it's almost suspicious if they don't have a C on their chest. If Sidney Crosby or Alex Ovechkin or Connor McDavid isn't the captain, you start asking questions. But I don't think that's the case for a Shane Wright or a Matty Beniers. And if I'm wrong, if it is, then okay, that's a good problem to have.
It really is.
I wouldn't really worry about it.
I think of, it's not like the greatest example, and I know you're not going to necessarily like this, RJ, but I think of the LA Kings. Dustin Brown being the captain, but you had guys like Drew Doughty and Anze Kopitar in particular, who was your superstar, who was the guy going out there, and is somebody who immensely capable of being a leader, right? Has leadership qualities all over the place, is a massive leader, but Dustin Brown was the captain. And even though, because he was there before and he was there and instrumental in helping establish the culture and everything, and then those other guys kind of grew around him and became superstars and became, the leaders on ice, so to speak, as far as, getting more playing time and all of that kind of stuff. But it was never an issue in that locker room, right? And then eventually it resolved itself and it was all fine. So I agree that it doesn't have to be a bad thing to either keep the C with somebody for the whole length of that, or if it does look like somebody else has really established themselves. I mean, I don't know Brandon Montour really at all, but I know hockey players, and they're generally pretty good at reading that situation and being open to making the switch when it seems appropriate and when it makes sense to do so. Right.
And we've seen that time and time again on various teams. I mean, you look at John Tavares handing it off to Austin Matthews this year. There was no real problem or issue with that. It happens, and when it makes sense, it'll happen usually pretty seamlessly.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be an interesting one. We will see. I agree. Like, all signs kind of point to Jordan Eberle. I want it to work, but I have my reservations, and I think you do too.
Yep. I know. I think that sums it up pretty well. So on to the next storyline.
Yep.
So they kind of did a little detour because we were talking about leadership. This one's back to more of the on ice stuff. Yeah. But I'm curious how the power play is going to look, because this is something that's going to be completely revamped. You have a new power play coach with Bob Woods and Jess Campbell working on the power play. And it was an area of failure last season. And really the last 3 years overall hasn't been all that great. Paul McFarland, the coach who ran it, is gone. But more interesting than that is the players, the personnel, and how that's going to look, because all of a sudden you have two very good power play quarterbacks in Brandon Montour and Vince Dunn. Do you split them up? Do you keep them together? I think that might be even more interesting. Do you keep them together, have two defensemen on a power play unit? That is very rare in the NHL, but when you have two defensemen like that, does it actually make sense to do that? So I guess that's the first question with the power play is, like, are they going to keep Montour and Dunn together, or are they going to split them up?
That's what I think is so interesting about having, Coach Woods be kind of the point man on this. Is he is a defensive coach. He is somebody who has worked with defensemen predominantly throughout his career. He's somebody who has developed a lot of really good defensemen, a lot of really good power play quarterback defensemen, going back to his time, whether it was in Washington with John Carlson, Anaheim working with a young Shea Theodore, and then what he's been able to go on and do once he moved over to Vegas and got the playing time that he deserved. Even in Minnesota with the guys that he's worked with, he worked with in Minnesota. I am curious because it's not only do you have Vince Dunn and Brandon Montour, you also have Riker Evans, who would be no slouch either holding down a power play. So if you were to double up on a power play unit with a Vince Dunn and a Brandon Montour, your other power play unit would still have Riker Evans. And it would be a way of getting arguably your three best power play players on this entire roster, just because the forward group on the power play has been suspect at times. Outside of maybe Jaden Schwartz just being a net front guy.
Or Jared McCann.
Yeah. You get them all to have ice time, and you're getting them all out there, and you're letting them do their thing with the man advantage. I think that is going to be something that is going to be really, really, really interesting. I have no idea. This is the one that I'm taking the largest, I feel like, wait and see approach, because I just want it to look like there is a plan, like there is a strategy, like guys know where they're supposed to be, and all of the things that we just have not seen from this team really ever in their 3 years of existence. We've never seen the power play really look like it has a plan, like it has an identity, like it's competent at times. So I feel like that's the stuff that I just want to see. Is I just want there to be a plan and a system and a focus beyond like the fun stuff of, hey, could we see two defensemen out there together? Even if it's like Montour runs the first unit and then Vince Dunn and Riker Evans both are out there on the second unit, something like that. I just want to see a plan in general, and I just want to see everybody on the same page and understanding what their roles and jobs are and having it, work. Just want to see goals, RJ. Just want to see power play goals.
I know. And there are a lot of ways to achieve that, right? But as you said, you have to have a plan and you have to know what you're going for. And that was, I think, our biggest complaint with the Kraken power play last season is we couldn't even tell what they were trying to accomplish. Right. It's one thing to have a system and a plan and you can't execute it right and it doesn't work. But it's another when you just don't have it seems like you don't have a plan at all. And so that's, I agree, what I'm hoping for. And so personnel is going to be a part of that, but it's not going to be everything. And so I'm interested to see that as well. But one more thing I do want to talk about personnel wise, because it does factor into the plan. I think part of any plan with a power play is making the most out of the personnel you do have.
Yeah.
And when you have players that have special attributes, figuring out where to utilize them the best. And a couple players we haven't mentioned yet with the power play, that's Shane Wright and Matty Beniers. Those are the two franchise cornerstone centers that when you have two forwards who are top 4 picks like that, you're hoping that they can help you on the power play. And so far through Matty Beniers' career, he hasn't been a real power play impact. And Shane Wright, this is really his first chance to do so. So where do those guys go and how do you make the most out of their skill sets? I'm interested to see that as well.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're willing to let him do his thing, is there any player more built for the bumper role in the slot there than Shane Wright, RJ? Right? If you
use the bumper, yes.
If you use the bumper, which, obviously the Kraken in the past have not, but we've watched so many teams playing against the Kraken use it extremely effectively. And I think even last year with like Logan Morrison, when he was on the power play, right? Like, oh my gosh, he looked like the best player the Kraken power play saw all of last season. And it was really just because he was like moving around a little bit in there, just like getting open. Like, you know what I mean? Just like, I'm just going to make myself available for a pass. And it just felt different. And I think Shane Wright, if you give him the freedom where it's, hey, you're a great slot player, utilize those instincts, know when to get open, know when to get behind the guy who's covering you, know when to pull off to the side just a little bit and open up that passing lane to yourself and then just let it rip the moment the puck gets there. I feel like the power play could have a lot more success. He's also not a bad playmaker, so you can do some of that stuff like we've seen with when we were playing against the Coyotes, right? Where they were utilizing the bumper almost as just like a little setup man, just a little touch pass type thing. I'd love to see the Kraken work on something like that, and I think Shane Wright could handle that. So I would love to see Shane Wright utilized in the bumper role if, one, the bumper role is going to be used, and two, if he's given the freedom to kind of move around and do his thing. If they just want a bumper role that's going to kind of be that secondary level of screening the goaltender while you mostly play up high, you're probably wasting Shane Wright there. You probably don't need him to be doing that. But if you're going to let Shane Wright move around, he knows when to get open. He knows how to get open in that area of the ice. If you're going to let him utilize those skills, I would love to see Shane Wright in the bumper role. Matty, again, we've talked about he needs to work on being a more inside player, not being stuck on the perimeter as much. It felt like he could have been something on the power play as a perimeter player. But again, the Kraken seem very focused on being stationary, not moving, not having liberties. I feel like if you're going to have a power play where you're going to allow a lot of player movement, where guys can be handing off assignments, so to speak, in the offensive zone, where if I've got the puck, I have the freedom to go into your area and you're going to slide over and replace me in the spot that I just left open, that would suit Matty Beniers so well, because then he could kind of cycle around, find open ice, find the places where he can see the ice the best, and then he could go and make his play. If you don't want to have that, which I think all power plays should have that, but if for some reason you're going to kind of stick with the what the Kraken have done in the past, which is guys don't really move around that much, I feel like you just got to work on with Matty Beniers on becoming a better net front player, because I think he's got good instincts. He could screen a goaltender really well. He does have good hands. Like, he has the hands of, if there is a rebound there, he can get his stick on it and hopefully push it home. But I feel like those are the two things, and really you're going to have to pick just one, and work with Maddie on just that one thing and kind of let him cook on that one thing moving forward. But it's going to be interesting because it's kind of different based on what the overall philosophy for the power play is going to be.
Right. And that still, we need to wait to see in training camp what they're going for. And on Maddie, I know you've been big on him potentially being even like a net front guy for tips and screens. That's probably where he found most of his power play success last year. I would still love to see them find a way for him to unlock that, or use that vision that he has, and that can be as a perimeter player. Like if there's, I guess I'll plug this for a second, if because we've been talking a lot about the power play and the 1-3-1 and puck movement, player movement. I did do one of our coaching systems videos about that on the Patreon, so if you're a patron you can take a look at that. And I think about one of the clips that I used in that video, and it's the one where it's talking about player movement, but it's a play where Connor Bedard kind of switches with the defenseman, moves up top, draws some players over to him, and finds a good backdoor pass. And so if you're on the Patreon, go take a look at that play in the video, because I could see Matty Beniers doing something just like that when he's given the freedom to kind of move up top, use that vision, and find some guys that can get open down low. That's what I would love to see from him on the power play, and I hope that the new power play coaches can find a way to make that work. As for Shane Wright, real quick, one thing I will say, if they choose to use him in the bumper spot, one thing that gives me hope on this is that if you look at the Firebirds power play, and I know it was different, Jess, wasn't really running it, and it was, it was Dan Bilesma's thing, and these other assistant was it? Wait, no, who was it? Sorry, Jess did run the power play.
Yeah, Jess did run the power play.
Okay, she did run the power play, but the way they used Ty Karche as a bumper, because he was probably the closest thing, before Shane Wright, but in the AHL level, the closest thing they had to a Shane Wright stylistically on the power play. And that's where they used him. And they did a lot of things to kind of get him open in the bumper spot. He was one of the most dangerous scorers on the power play there. I do wonder if some of that carries over to the Kraken, but it's Shane Wright in that spot instead of Ty Karche.
Yeah. Again, though, it's the same thing. If you're going to utilize the bumper, you either need to give them a very specific plan for touch passes and stuff like that, or you have to let them, leave them to their own devices and their own instincts on when to get open and when to make their move, because they're going to have 2, sometimes even 3 guys on them, essentially. And they're going to need to pick and choose when they make a move and get open. And the timing of that, they've got to be really selective, and they've got to really understand what's going on there. I think Shane Wright has the capacity to do that, but you have to give them the freedom to do that, because it is so instinct driven and it's so situational and just in the moment. And so I would love for the power play to kind of take on that look and give them the freedom to do that and the opportunity to do that. The other thing real quick with Matty Beniers, he has that vision and that playmaking. I'd love to see if he could work behind the net. And if he is the net front player, anytime the puck gets loose, goes back behind the net, I'd like to see him, if his vision plays from there, can he make a pass out to Shane Wright in the slot, in the bumper role? And can he make something happen? I think that would be really interesting too, and kind of give a different look for Matty Beniers from anything we've really seen from him before.
Yeah, no, I think the options are almost endless with this and how you can utilize those players. So I think it's probably a fun task as a coaching staff to kind of figure out how to utilize these players, and I hope they make the most of it.
Definitely.
So talking about the 2 young franchise centers, there's actually a third potential young franchise center that we're going to see at training camp and for the first time, and also at rookie camp as well. And this is the final storyline that I wanted to go over, and it's involving Berkeley Catton, the Kraken's first round pick from this previous draft. And I want to see how he looks next to NHLers, because we've never really seen that before. He's going to be there at training camp with NHL veterans, and we know that he is as skilled as anybody. There's a reason he was a top 10 pick, but of course, slighter frame, he still definitely has some growing, some developing to do. I want to see how close he looks to some of those NHL veterans and if he can hang.
Yes, I think that's going to be so much fun to watch. I mean, just the plays that he's going to try to pull off is going to be unlike anything we've seen Kraken players do in the past. We talked about that at rookie camp, right? And I think that that's going to be really exciting. I think that's going to be really exciting for a lot of the existing guys on the team to have, and I think that's going to be really intriguing. But yes, how close is he physically to being ready to go? And also, does he kind of add that spark and that extra dimension to the Kraken? He's a very good transitional player. Again, if they're trying to work on that, he's kind of already built for it in a way. A lot of the guys on the roster are going to have to be learning some of the things that he just already knows. So can he in some ways help teach the older guys on the team that kind of stuff just from them watching him play? And I think that's going to be really intriguing. Just, yeah, the creativity. I mean, I think of like, if there's one player I could see really enjoying having him on a line, it's Andre Burakovsky. Just because I feel like the two of them could unlock each other's creativity in a way that I don't know that there's like a ton of other guys on the Kraken that are necessarily all that creative. We've talked about this in the past. That's maybe something that they've been lacking at times to help get things going offensively. But I think like him and Berkey could be really interesting together. I'd love to see them paired up for a little while. But I think beyond just the physical stuff, because that's obviously going to be the most important thing, because we know he can play. We know he's going to be a special offensive talent. It's just going to be a matter of him being able to physically hang with everybody. I'm really intrigued to see if he kind of lights a fire under some other guys when he's out there to try to match his pace and match his game, so to speak.
Right. And I think that's going to be great for a lot of the vets too, to have someone like that out there, that maybe pushing them in a way. Cause whenever you're a player like that, your ultimate goal, as unlikely as it may be, is to make that roster, at least initially, and kind of get that cup of coffee in the NHL that everybody wants. And I think he's going to be geared up for that. I'm with you on playing with some of the vets like Andre Burakovsky that you mentioned, because Berkly Catton can think the game at such a high level.
Yes.
The way that his brain works and the things that he tries, so few other players at his age are able to do that and be on that same page. But I think you take veteran NHLers or someone like a Burakovsky, who you mentioned,
or Bjorkstrand,
or a Bjorkstrand, who can think the game at that speed. And I feel like they'll all feel right at home together.
Yeah.
Even though, the size difference, all that stuff, but it doesn't really come out as much in training camp. So just seeing some of those drills, especially the ones that maybe don't involve a ton of contact and hitting, where they can really do their thing, I think it's going to be a joy for some of these other wingers who maybe haven't had a line mate quite like that, maybe ever.
Yeah, it's gonna be really special. He's gonna be so much fun to watch. And look, I'm even looking forward to him in rookie camp and in the rookie showcase, the whatever it's called, down in Los Angeles in the 2 games that the prospect teams are gonna be playing against each other. Because I'd love to see him going up against a Macklin Celebrini type and those kinds of guys and the top prospects from other teams. I'd love to see what he can kind of do in a prospect best on best kind of tournament. I think that's going to be really intriguing as well. So I just think there's going to be a lot of fun stuff to be paying attention to when it comes to Berkly Catton, beyond just the fact that, he's the latest first round pick and all that kind of stuff. I just don't know that the Kraken have ever had a player like him before that is just a pure offensive stud who's going to go out there and create plays and just look different in a good way. And I think that that's going to be just really, really fun and added an extra dimension to Kraken training camp that we've never seen before. And I'm all for it.
Yeah. So I don't know about you, Dylan, but I can't wait for training camp now. After talking about all these storylines, I just want it to be here right now.
I know, like, this is the problem with doing it, I guess, 10 days before training camp starts, is like now we have to wait so long. We're going to have to do another deep dive before we even get to training camp, RJ.
I know. Well, here's the thing. We have rookie camp to hold us over.
Yes.
That's on Thursday. That's 3 days away.
Yeah.
We can do it. We can make it, Dylan.
We can do it. We can do it. And we could certainly do it with the help of Queen Anne Beer Hall. We can go bide our time eating pretzel after pretzel, RJ, over at the beer hall at either of their 2 great locations. Again, like I said earlier, check out the Moss Bay Hall brunch, particularly maybe next Sunday. You can watch the Seahawks play and have a killer brunch. That seems like a pretty good win-win to me. So I definitely recommend everybody goes and checks out Queen Anne Beer Hall for all that. Otherwise, everybody just get ready. We're so close. We're so close. It is just around the corner. Kraken training camp begins in 10 days. Rookie camp in 3. I'm looking forward to it so much. I know you are too, RJ. I just can't wait to see everybody there. Till then, see y'all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.